it will help you to be able to have a little bit of extra money in your pocket for other necessities, other essentials. So if you want to pay a fair price at the pumps to make that commute more affordable, you have one option, which is to join us. Join us and get out to vote and vote for the NDP. The polls are open already, and together there's just no doubt that you can do better, that we can do better with a premier who's working for you. On that note, I'll take questions that folks have, but I wanted, before I get the questions, I just want to say, I've been, as you know, traveling around the province for the last little while, and I've met all kinds of people who have told me that they have no choice but to drive to work. I think about a woman who's a PSW that or a nurse actually, that I met in Mattawa in Nipissing Riding, and a friend of hers who is a PSW was supposed to be at that meeting as well to talk about rural access to healthcare. But the woman who's a PSW got called in at the last minute, and the conversation she was going to have with me was about how hard it is for PSWs to be able to, to pay the bills because they're using their own vehicles. And when gas prices go up, it's costing them more and more money out of their pockets, and it's not being reimbursed by the companies that they work for. So that's just one example of a working person who would benefit significantly from the plan that we have to cap gas prices and stop the gouging. So on that note, I'll just take any questions that folks might have.
First question comes from Mon Alhamidi from the Canadian Press.
Morning, Mon.
Good morning. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for taking our questions. So there was a study commissioned by the Ontario Energy Board that found that gas prices, like the regulation of gas prices, doesn't necessarily lead to lower prices. In some cases, it has even led to higher prices. What evidence are you providing or you're relying on to make sure that regulation would definitely help customers?
Well, what we've seen for a very long time is this gouging, this predatory kind of behavior that gas companies engage in. We've had a situation in Ontario where the big gas companies were charged and convicted of price fixing in Northern Ontario, trying to squeeze out the independent gas station and squeezing those folks out of the market, the independents, so they could have more market share. This behavior is not acceptable. And what we need to do is signal very clearly to the gas companies and the big gas and oil folks that that's just not acceptable anymore. And in fact, just this past week, the House of Representatives in the US has done the exact same thing. They also realize that the big gas and oil companies are gouging American drivers, just like they're gouging Ontario drivers. And it's unfortunate that that Mr. Del Duca and Mr. Ford are not prepared to take on big gas and oil. Certainly the Democrats in the United States are, and the New Democrats here in Ontario are, and that's what we need, a premier that's prepared to protect the interests of everyday Ontarians and make sure that the affordability of everyday life is addressed piece by piece. So whether that's the getting the gouging out and capping the gas prices at the pumps, or whether that's getting insurance rates down. And we talk about another predatory industry. People are paying significantly higher insurance rates here in Ontario than they should. The Liberals didn't fix it. Doug Ford won't fix it. The NDP will fix it.
Do you have a follow-up, Matt?
Yeah, I do. So if the goal is to lower gas prices for drivers and make the price more predictable, wouldn't Ford gas tax cut do the same thing? Have the same result?
No, absolutely not. In fact, in Alberta, they've gotten rid of the gas taxes completely, but they have the highest gas prices they've ever had in that province. What happens is the gas tax might come off. So for Ford and Del Duca's scheme, that might mean about $12 a month for drivers for 6 months, which is not a lot. But that 5 cents can just easily be taken up by the gas companies, increasing the prices to be able to get the benefit. So the benefit of the gas tax reduction that Ford and Del Duca are selling is very likely going to go into the unregulated pockets of big gas and oil. And we know that that happens. And so what I'm saying is it doesn't have to be that way. We can regulate the gas prices. We can put a cap on those gas prices. We can stop the gouging. And we're not the only ones that are talking about this. Everybody recognizes just how bad things are in terms of gas pricing. And as I mentioned, even in the US, this is something that the Democrats are prepared to take on. And so am I. And I do say we will be setting the wholesale price as well as the retail price, making it a fair system so that the companies can get profit out of the system, but not in a way that is so predatory, not in a way that gouges drivers whenever they get a chance, in a way that makes sense and that people understand with some transparency and some acknowledgement that a lot of people have no choice but to drive their cars and they need to have an affordable price of gas, one that isn't bouncing all over the place at the whim of big oil and gas.
Next question comes from Andy Takagi from Queen's Park Briefing.
Morning, Andy.
Morning. Sorry, it took me a second to unmute there. Hope you're feeling all right. So obviously yesterday was, you had that big announcement on the 407 ETR and tolling. I'm wondering, how this will be paid for. I know it was mentioned that you'd be recouping costs from deferred costs that the Ford government passed on, but what's the process for that and how realistic is that prospect?
It's very realistic. And just because Doug Ford doesn't think that the private corporation that runs our 407 highway shouldn't be responsible for the built-in fines that are in their contract. Doug Ford obviously doesn't think that those companies or that company in particular should be held accountable for the very contract that they're supposed to be operating under. I disagree. And so we are going to go back at them and we're going to make sure that all of the pieces in the contract that they have penalties for when they don't meet those requirements are going to be paid. And that's going to help us to pay for that removal of the tolls for trucks. But let me also say this. Truckers have had a difficult time, both with the former Liberal government and with this Conservative government. I have heard so many times over the last number of years from transportation planners. In fact, this very idea was put forward, to the government in the past. We have to do what's necessary to not only make sure that piece of highway infrastructure is utilized effectively to get the pressure off the other 400 series highways, but also in tandem remove the incentive that Doug Ford and his buddies have for building new highways like the 413 and the Bradford bypass. We have existing infrastructure. Let's find the way, and I believe this is the way, to ensure that it's utilized to its maximum capacity instead of building new highways to big houses that nobody can afford and that we can't afford to drive on because our gas prices are too high and we can't afford the insurance either. These are all part of the same kind of envelope of expenses that are really weighing on everyday drivers in Ontario. And so we have solutions to these things. And I'm excited to be able to bring them forward. It doesn't have to be the same old with parties that never fix the things that are wrong, where people continue to be frustrated because nothing ever gets better for them. Life continues to get harder. We can change that up this time. This time you can have a premier that works for you and that really does take care of the things that matter most and make life more affordable for you.
And as a follow-up, pivoting slightly, back in April, you released what you called a full platform. It wasn't costed, but obviously, it was supposed to include a lot of your policies. But since then, you've added a few things that have that weren't in that initial full platform. I'm thinking of doubling ODSP rates and this new 407 ETR toll policy. Why wasn't those policies included in the full platform release? And when were they developed if they weren't part of the initial plan?
Well, Andrew, we got to leave some surprises for the campaign. We have to leave something for the campaign that shows people that we have their best interests at heart. And so these policies are things that we save for the campaign because we know how important they are. And the campaign context often provides the opportunity for people to be able to take note. Whereas putting in a significantly fulsome platform document doesn't necessarily do that.
Next question comes from Lorenda Redekop from CBC.
Hi, Lorenda.
Hi, Andrea. On the gas prices, Stephen Del Duca spoke about that this morning, and he said that regulating gas prices doesn't work. He pointed to other provinces. He talked about the East Coast. What do you say about that?
I say that he's never favored that. The Liberals have never favored that. And that's his position to defend. And we know that gas prices are different in different regions across the country. What we're saying is here in Ontario, we don't want to see drivers being gouged at the pumps anymore. And we don't want to see the big oil and gas companies on a whim jack up the prices when they think they can get away with it. So I don't buy what Mr. Del Duca is saying. Certainly there's regulation, as you identified, in the eastern provinces, also in some of the states in the US. But I think everybody is realizing yet again that the oil and gas companies are taking advantage. And that has to stop. And that's why the Democrats passed a bill in the House of Representatives just this past week, because it's apparent that we need to rein in the greed of the big oil and gas companies.
You talked about leaving some surprises for the campaign. What can you say about what's still to come?
Well, then it wouldn't be a surprise, would it?
But are there still more to come?
We are going to be spending the next 2 weeks showing Ontarians that they don't have to keep going back and forth between governments that simply don't fix the things that matter most. As I said earlier, the Liberals have shown they won't fix it or that they haven't fixed it. Doug Ford shows that he won't fix any of these things. And what we're saying to people is you can fix the things that are broken. So we've already talked about a number of those things. And we're certainly looking forward to the next 2 weeks as we get through the second half of the campaign and show people you can have a premier that works for you every day at Queen's Park, as opposed to a premier that works for his buddies or their insiders.
Next question comes from Rob Ferguson from the Toronto Star.
Hey, Rob.
Hi, Andrea. Sorry, I was just a bit slow to unmute there. I am wondering what you think of Doug Ford being in Niagara Falls today. That's one of your ridings. Yesterday, he was in St. Catharines. He was in Hamilton. Is he getting a little bit cocky?
I really have no idea what Mr. Ford thinks he can do in these working class ridings that vote New Democrat. In fact, I just heard from somebody in my riding just yesterday that she's never seen as many NDP signs as she sees now in this campaign. Working people know that Doug Ford's not on their side. They all know that he won't fix the things that matter. He won't make sure that wages are decent. He continues to have a low wage policy that not only is impacting our healthcare and public sector workers with Bill 124, which we'll scrap, but we also see that policy seeping into the private sector because those private sector companies are taking the lead of Doug Ford. The premier says we need a low wage economy here. That hurts workers. It doesn't protect them. Doug Ford didn't bring paid sick days to Ontario during a global pandemic. He could have protected working people. He chose not to. And I think workers know very well that with Doug Ford, there's just no doubt that he's not on their side.
Do you think that that all these ridings you hold in these areas are perfectly safe then? And just as a quick addendum, I wondered if you made it back from Ottawa, where you're speaking to us from today.
Sure. So on the first thing, absolutely. I know that all of our Niagara candidates, Wayne Gates, Jenny Stevens, Jeff Birch, have done great work for the people of the Niagara region. But no, we're never arrogant. We spend our time going to debates, engaging in community, knocking on doors, putting up signs, basically running in an election in a way that's that's respectful to the voters. That's what we're supposed to do. We are supposed to engage voters and talk to them at the door about the things that are on their minds. So our team will do that. We certainly don't take anything for granted, but I'm not worried at all. And I'm hopeful that we might even pick up another seat in the Niagara region. We have a great candidate running in the Niagara region, and that would be a pickup for us. And I think it's important to note where Doug Ford might be trying to take NDP ridings, which I don't think he's going to be very successful at all. But what we're doing is we're going into conservative ridings for the most part, because we think that there are people who are very disappointed with how Doug Ford has dealt with this province over the last 4 years. So we're looking to those ridings for pickups. Mr. Del Duca is coming after NDP seats. That's his choice. But this time, the Liberal team doesn't have what it takes to defeat Doug Ford, and the NDP does. On the COVID piece, yeah, I'm obviously disappointed that happened, and here isolating in Toronto because this is the home base for me, and that's why I'm here.
Next question comes from Cynthia Mulligan from City News.
Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, Andrea. Hope you're doing well today. I was watching Stephen Del Duca this morning, and I noticed quite a difference in his approach in his opening statements, where he didn't even mention the NDP. He was only talking about Doug Ford. And yes, he was in Ottawa and he's trying to get those Ottawa seats. But I sense a change in Liberal strategy in the second half of the campaign, where they're kind of ignoring you, perhaps, and they're just going after Doug Ford, positioning themselves so that they can steal NDP voters who might want to vote strategically. Are you concerned about this change in tactic, and does it reflect any softening in NDP votes?
No, not at all. And in fact, I think when people look at the things that we all want to see fixed in this province, our crumbling schools, our healthcare system that was on its knees when the Liberals left, the long-term care and home care sectors, the seniors care that again was frozen and not invested in or monitored properly by the Liberals. People have an important choice. This time you can have a government and a premier that actually fixes those things. And I know Mr. Del Duca wants to pretend that he wasn't part of a government that made those choices, but in fact he was. And so I wonder where he was when all of these things were being discussed at the cabinet table. Was he out getting a coffee? I get it that he doesn't want to take responsibility for anything that happened before, but let's face it, there's a lot of responsibility that needs to be taken, which is why people were so disappointed with 15 years of Liberals and why Mr. Del Duca lost his seat. This election is an election that has a lot at stake. And I would say to people, if you believe that the things that we've all talked about are important and need to be fixed, then let's come together. Let's come together and vote for somebody that can defeat Doug Ford this time around and actually begin to fix those things. And that would be the NDP.
You have a follow-up, Cynthia?
Sorry, to Rob Ferguson's point, are you concerned though that Doug Ford is in your territory, your traditional territory? And so you have the Liberals now seemingly going, we don't need to worry about the NDP, and Doug Ford going after your home turf. Are you concerned about being squeezed out on both sides?
Oh, not at all. Not at all. I think Ontarians can see clearly the difference between a party and a former government that didn't fix the things that mattered. In fact, brought a lot of the problems that we are now grappling with to Ontario and the decisions that they made, and a premier on the other side, or a candidate and party for leadership on the other side who won't fix those things. We all know that conservative cuts just make things worse. And so if people are looking at, how do we start to really fix the things that are broken and bring some hope back to Ontarians, the obvious choice is the NDP.
Next question comes from Colin DeMello from Global News.
Morning, Colin.
Hey, good morning, Andrea. Hope you're feeling better. I wanted to ask about gun control. We've been doing a series of stories about tracking illegal weapons. A lot of them obviously come from the United States. So what would an NDP government actually do and realistically do to stop the flow of guns coming in from the United States?
Yeah, I've been seeing some of that work that you've been doing and others. And I just have to say, when we see the violence on the street, when we see young people lose their lives at unbelievably young ages, 15, 14, and engaged in violence at the community level, that is just horrifying. There's a huge problem. And so part of that is illegal handguns on the streets, no doubt about it. But another part of that is making sure that young people have systems of support through their formative years. We've talked a long time in Ontario about how do we make communities stronger? How do we support kids as they go through their growing years? How do we make sure that services are there? How to make sure that they have a positive environment in school, and how they're supported to succeed in school, and that they can see a future that doesn't include violence, that includes opportunity and good jobs, and support to achieve a post-secondary success. So I would say the handgun piece is absolutely something that we need to address, but let's not forget that it's young people who are engaged in this activity, and we are failing them by not taking care of the things that they need to make another choice in life. And this isn't news. We had a report that was provided to the Ontario legislature years and years ago, the Roots of Youth Violence, it was called, and sadly, it sat on a shelf, and very few of the recommendations have been implemented. We need to get back at how do we support communities? How do we support young people? How do we get racism and other kinds of experiences that they have out of their daily lives, and show them that there's a better path forward, and support them through that pathway.
Fair enough. Do you feel, though, that the federal government maybe is doing enough to prevent illegal handguns from crossing the border? Or is this just a jurisdictional issue? Is there something that the province can actually do to try to hamper the amount of weapons that cross the border and into the hands of people who commit crimes in Ontario streets?
Well, Colin, I think that there's always room for jurisdictional cooperation when it comes to the big issues that concern us. And of course, gun violence is one of those big issues. Certainly the federal government, because they're the ones that control the borders, have a role to play. But I know that Ontario has police forces and other bodies that can also be engaged in a cooperative effort. Handguns on downtown streets, whether it's here in Toronto, whether it's in my home community of Hamilton, and any other community where we're seeing that gun violence happen, it's going to take all of us to come up with these solutions that will actually work, because things are getting better and not worse.
Next question comes from Leith Dunnock from TD Newswatch.
Hello, Lee.
Hi, Andrea. Here in Thunder Bay, I want to sort of piggyback on Colin's questions on guns, but more focused on the guns and gang issue we have here in Thunder Bay. I've been here for about 20 years, and I haven't seen as many gun-related deaths and injuries and things like that. And just what would an NDP government do to solve that problem here in Thunder Bay?
Well, I think it's a big part, Leaf, of the overall problem, and to identify that the gun violence that we talk about here in Toronto, or as I described in Hamilton, is also happening in communities like Thunder Bay, and communities like Sudbury is another one that I hear a lot about, and a lot of the northern communities are worried about the same things. The solutions may look a little bit different in northern communities, but the result of not finding the right mixture of policies to address that gun violence is just going to continue to allow it to proliferate, and people lose lives, like young people lose lives, and communities feel unsafe. So Thunder Bay is situated in particular ways in terms of their geography, and we know that there's a community in Thunder Bay that is really concerned about people who are unable to make a good life, to make a good life happen in Thunder Bay. So we would be doing similar things, but much more focused and targeted on the needs of the Thunder Bay community. There's certainly, I think, structural things in terms of what I was talking with Colin about, partnering with the federal government, for example, in that regard. But the kinds of things that I was also talking about in terms of how do we support communities to be able to provide opportunity and hope for the people that are joining gangs and are being part of these unacceptable behaviors. The solution for Thunder Bay is going to look different from the solution here in the South.
Switching gears slightly, since you were unable to make it to Thunder Bay today, what do you see as your number one or number two priorities for the First Nations here in Northwestern Ontario? There's all kinds of issues that need to be dealt with and aren't being dealt with at the speed a lot of people would like to see.
No, you're absolutely right, and it's unbelievable what some First Nations communities, many First Nations communities, are still addressing after years and years and years of these same problems. And whether that's an inability to have safe drinking water on their territories, whether that's the housing crisis that continues to be problematic on the territories, whether that's lack of healthcare and access to proper healthcare. All of these things are unsolved for many, many years. And when it came to the water crisis, I've always said that we are not going to put up with this jurisdictional ping pong that kept happening for the last, decades. It's been happening for decades as the water never gets dealt with. And the province, under the former Liberals and now most recently under the Conservatives, they just play ping pong back and forth with the federal government on whose responsibility it is. That has to stop. And so what I've always said with water, and I say now with housing, we'll start fixing it. We'll get to work to start fixing the water crisis and the housing crisis, and we'll send the bill to Ottawa, because people should not be living in the kinds of conditions that they are. And as those conditions worsen and people have difficulty in eking out a dignified existence, we see what happens. We see when young people lose hope for the future. And we know the suicide crisis that's been up and down over the last couple of years. No young person should want to die by suicide because there's just no hope and their existence is so bleak. We also know that a lot of folks leave the territories to come into the larger centers because they literally cannot survive on the territory. So we'll work very closely with the leadership in the various territories. We'll work with the urban communities in places like Thunder Bay, in places like Sioux Lookout, in places like Kenora, and make sure that we're doing what needs to be done to deal with the housing crisis, to deal with the healthcare crisis, to deal with the drinking water crisis, and provide dignity and quality of life for not only people who are living in the territories, in the First Nations territories, but also in the urban settings.
Next question comes from Jeff Gray from the Globe and Mail.
Hi, Jeff.
How are you?
I'm hanging in.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you just first, if you tell us a little bit, how are you doing? Are you feeling fatigued? You mentioned having a fever and sort of a head cold. how are you doing physically, and how frustrated are you that you are? I know you love campaigning. You are stuck in Toronto on Zoom with us. How frustrating is it?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt it's frustrating. I really do love campaigning, and I love hearing people's stories about what's happening in their lives and giving them hope that there could be some solutions to the issues that they face, the concerns that they face. And I get energy from that, and I've always been that way. So I do miss that, to be frank. But I saved my Tylenol dose for about an hour before the Zoom meeting, and so it managed my fever and my sore throat a little bit. But that's pretty much it. Not different than from what a lot of other people in Ontario that have had COVID have faced, right? So things like fatigue and headaches and a bit of coughing and that kind of a thing. But I'm going to do the right thing. I'm isolating, and I'm going to make sure that I take care of myself, and in so doing, take care of others as well.
Glad to hear you're doing all right there and making good use of Tylenol. Okay, the question I want to ask is about the 407. You seem very confident you'd get the money from the private company that runs the 407, but I mean, there is certainly an argument to be made that these penalties that would apply to them shouldn't apply. There's a force majeure here, surely, that the government was actually ordering people not to go to work for much of that penalty period, or recommending it very strongly, and that's why traffic was down on the 407. And surely there'll be lawyers, and this will be a super complicated process to get any money out of them.
Yes, but it's a battle worth engaging in, because they've had a free ride for a very long time when it comes to the kinds of penalties that we're talking about. And I have to say, that battle is much more reasonable when you compare it to the building of a 413 of another 400 series highway that's going to pave over wetlands and farmland and environmentally sensitive areas and conservation lands, at the Bradford bypass, which creates similar damage, as well as the Holland Marsh. When you're looking at which one of these things is the better solution, I firmly believe that better utilization of the 407 is exactly the way to go.
Last question comes from Allison Jones from the Canadian Press.
Hi, Allison.
Hi, I just wanted to quickly follow up on your answer to Andy's question about the platform additions, revisions, particularly on the ODSP part. You said these policies are things we saved for the campaign, but on ODSP, for example, your platform document doesn't say we're going to increase rates, stay tuned to see how much. It says we're going to increase rates by 20%. So was that an incorrect number, or just help me understand what's going on there?
Not at all. The initial offer is the 20%. But like we've always done, the NDP has always done this, is worked closely with the ODSP community to try to fix what Doug Ford broke, or rather what Mike Harris broke, frankly, back in the 90s, and what the Liberals refused to fix. So we've always been in close contact with the community. In fact, in the last campaign, we adopted all of the recommendations that were made by a committee of people with lived experience that worked through what was wrong with ODSP and how it can be fixed. And we're doing the same thing now. And it's not just a matter of the rates, it's a matter of overhauling the system. So there's an immediate change in the rates, but we also have a commitment to overhaul what has become a very punitive system and dehumanizing system, a system that doesn't allow people to live with dignity and quality of life, and a system that Doug Ford wants to privatize. We will not privatize ODSP, and we'll make sure that that people get the supports they need to lead a dignified quality of life.
Okay, so just to confirm, you had intended to do that, the doubling in year 2 all along, and wasn't announced in response to criticisms heard mid-campaign?
Well, I mean, as I said, there's no doubt that we work closely with the disability community, and we're prepared to continue to do that. We've always done that as a New Democrat. I've always fought for people with disabilities when I was elected and even before I was elected, because we know that the systems that we now have in place do not meet people's needs. And as everything continues to increase, we know that the supports they need are even to address those is even more important in this really unaffordable economy that we have right now.
Seeing no further questions, I'll turn it back to you, Andrea.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your well wishes. And hopefully these symptoms I have will dissipate and I'll be able to be testing negative and getting back on the campaign trail physically in as short as time as possible, but always following public health rules. And to Ontarians, just a reminder, you can have a premier that will take on big gas and oil the way that Mr. Del Duca doesn't want to do and Doug Ford doesn't want to do, but Andrea Horwath will do. Thank you.